Once upon a time, there was an elephant. He was a baby elephant. He lived happily in the forest or the jungle. And one day he was just strolling around looking for some bananas when a group of humans came and threw a net over him and grabbed him and threw him in a trailer and took him to a strange place. They put him into a walled area and got out a chain, put it around its leg, and then fastened it to something sturdy on the ground. Well, the poor little baby elephant wasn't sure what was happening, and it tugged on its chain and tugged. It wanted to go back to its mummy and daddy, but it couldn't. It was stuck. And the harder the little baby elephant tugged, the more the chain hurt its leg. And day after day, that baby elephant for the next couple of weeks tugged and tried to get loose. And every time it would hurt its leg more and more until it was nearly bleeding. And then one day, the baby elephant gave up tugging on that chain, for he knew that he would never, ever be free again. But that baby elephant grew up to be a big, humongous elephant. But it still had that same tiny chain around its leg. He didn't know that he was now strong enough to break the chain, because he remembered from his past that he was unable to do it, and nothing has changed. Or has it? How many of us have a chain around our leg? And we still think that we are not strong enough to break free. We do not know that with Jesus, we are strong enough to break the chains that bind us. Because Jesus says to us in John chapter 8, verse 36, "So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed, no longer needed to be bound by chains." Maybe even chains that bind you in a destructive relationship with other people. I mentioned this morning that our conference, I'm not sure if it's union-wide or division-wide, but our conference here has labelled today as Domestic Violence or Abuse Awareness Day. And it's not a pleasant thing to talk about, is it? I'd rather talk about chocolate. But when we don't talk about things, when things remain secret, they become like the invisible elephant in the room, don't they? It's there. Everyone knows it's there, but no one wants to talk about it while the elephant is busily munching away and crushing people in its midst. But does domestic violence, does this happen in our church? We know it's out there in the community. Does it happen in our church? Is it better being in the church than not in the church? Does it affect people's relationships? Before we look at that, what is a definition of domestic violence? Probably one way to define it is a pattern of behaviour to what? Control another person in an intimate adult relationship. We're not talking about bringing up children, because yes, I smack my daughter when she's naughty, but that is not domestic violence. That is being a good parent who wants to protect their children and bring them up to know what the boundaries in life are so that they can be a good citizen in this world. Because if we don't have that, children do whatever they want and we know what the results are. Now we're talking about adult relationships. And the thing is, whenever we think of domestic violence, there are two big words that jump up out at us. physical and sexual, because they're the things that the law can actually do something about. But it is more than that. It encompasses so much more: verbal, emotional, economical, spiritual abuse. They're things we don't really talk about because it's really sort of hard to do something about. The law can't get involved. You know, if you tell someone that they're an idiot all the time, they're worthless, you're not going to call the police. But does that have an effect on that person who keeps hearing those negative comments? Or what about the person in the relationship who controls all the money so that the other person literally has to beg for some money just to buy everyday things? Abuse can occur in such a wider aspect that we are used to hearing about. So what about our church? A few years ago, this is a snapshot of a video you can see on YouTube, which I watched a couple of days ago. Dr. Tim Jennings, he presents statistical data on domestic violence in the church, and this was, I think, uploaded in 2012. One thing I am really proud about our church is we are not too scared to have a look at ourselves. We're not perfect, we know that. But at least in our church, we are ready to ask the hard questions. We are ready to look at our church and find out what we're really like. So what is our church like? Well, let's see, in comparison to how the world is out there, what is the world like? And you know, it's really hard to nail down statistics because each survey that goes out, they have different definitions of domestic violence and abuse and so forth. But you can generally get a picture when you look at all the studies that 1 in 3 people experience domestic violence in their lifetime. Now, if there's 100 of us here, that means 30 of us. But the one thing that people are not highlighting, and I would have loved to have shown you a video this morning for 2 minutes, but it's not G-rated. It has swearing in it, unfortunately, but it's a real eye-opener. It really shows that men are also affected by domestic violence. 1 in 3 of those who experience domestic violence are men. And it's generally not the physical or the sexual or that stuff. It's the verbal, it's the emotional. We are affected as well by it. But most people just laugh when they see it because they think, how can, you're bigger than your wife. You shouldn't have let that affect you. Words don't affect you. And yet, it does. When the study was done on the church, it found out that domestic violence is at the same rate inside the church as outside the church. It makes no difference. What's the good of church then? What's the good of the gospel? What's the good of Jesus Christ if it doesn't actually make any difference whether you're inside the church or outside the church? Doesn't Jesus make a difference in your life? Because the statistics are showing it doesn't. And in a way, some may say we really shouldn't be too surprised about this because in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 to 5, it predicts what people will be like in these end times. There will be terrible times in the last days. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of the good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. Where are these people? He's not describing the people out in the church, out in the world. He's describing the people in the church, having a form of godliness but denying its power. You think he might be describing domestic violence in there as well? And it's very interesting. When you look at verse 6, the next preceding or the next verse that comes after this passage, it says, these people, they are the kind who worm their way into homes and gain control over gullible women. Another version, weak-willed women. But as we've seen, it's not just the women that hurt from abuse. But why? Why? Doesn't Christianity make a difference? Why? I believe that they, even us, have the wrong picture of God. Having a wrong picture of God affects the way you conduct your relationships with other people. Let's have a look again at the domestic violence definition that I've given to you. A pattern of behaviour to what? Control. Let me ask you a question. Does God control? Does God manipulate? Does God coerce people? Does he? Are you sure? I know. We all know up here that he doesn't. Do we see God as an authoritarian dictator who controls people by punishing those who break his laws? If I asked you the question, what would happen to you if today you decided not to come to church but watch the Olympics and buy some pizza and sit in front of your TV? What's God going to do to you? How do you think God's going to feel about that? And when the next morning you wake up and you start your car and it won't start, has God punished you? This is the mentality that abusers can have. I know what's best and you don't. So I will make you do it my way for your own good, because I'm here to protect you. I'm here to save you. Is this how we see God? I know you're probably shaking your heads, but think about it. Does God know what's best? Yes, I hope so, because if God's not sure how things are going on, I've got problems, don't I? Does God know best? Of course God knows best. Do we know best? No. I'm always second guessing myself. I want to do the right thing, but I know there's a part of me that is very selfish and wants to do the me thing. And so God created laws to help us to be good people, didn't he? Is that how God controls us? Because that's in the Old Testament, there's a whole heap of laws. Do this, do this, do this. Don't commit adultery. If you commit adultery, you'll be stoned. So I give you the laws, I give you the consequences so that you will keep the laws, so that you can be good people. Is this how we see God? Maybe we don't even realize that we might see him that way. Does God use his laws to control us? When we look at Jesus Christ, you know why Jesus Christ came to this world? To show us in person what God is really like. And you will find nowhere in the scriptures, in the Gospels, where Jesus coerced, manipulated, controlled anyone. And I want you to remember that, because that is a very important fact. And in this illustration here, a married woman is caught sleeping with another man, is brought to Jesus. She's committed adultery. She knows she's done it. And the punishment is being stoned. And they present him to Jesus and say, Jesus, the law says she should be killed. What do you say? Jesus had every right. He had every opportunity to enforce the law. But what did he do? Jesus Christ looked at the woman and asked himself, what can I do to help her the most? He showed her mercy. He showed her mercy. God's laws, this is important. God's laws are to bring us to Jesus. If you are keeping God's laws without Jesus in the picture, well, that's good, you'll become a good person, but you're missing the whole point. God's laws are to bring us to Jesus, not to make us try harder to keep them, because you cannot keep them. And when you keep trying to keep them, you'll always be disappointed. And then you'll start thinking, I'm disappointing God. What must God think of me? And you get afraid of God. And your whole picture of God gets messed up. When we sin, when we fail with the laws, we go to Jesus, because it's only a heart transformation in a relationship with God that will make us what God wants us to be, not an outward obedience. This is how we change. By beholding, we are changed. What do we behold? We adapt and become like the God we worship. This is why it's so important to have the correct picture of God. If we worship a God of love, we become what? More loving. You will become what you fix your eyes on. But if you worship an authoritative dictator, you will become what? More abusive. I wish we could read this verse for the first time, because familiarity means it doesn't mean much anymore. But it says it all. For God so loved the world that he gave the most important thing that he had, his only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not reap the consequences of a selfish life, but can have eternal life. Notice that this verse does not say that whoever believes in him shall not be punished. God is not about coercing us, punishing, saying, if you don't believe in me, I'm going to make your life hell on earth. God does not do that. God knows the results of a selfish life. Just like God knows the results if you have chocolate 3 times a day. I mean, natural consequences. You'll get sick. Tastes good, but you'll get sick. God doesn't need to punish, to control. God gave his most valuable gift to you. He doesn't manipulate, coerce, or control. He invites your love and helps you to become the best person you can be. Now you're probably saying to Michael, I know this. I know God is a God of love. I don't believe he's an authoritative dictator. Well, let me ask you a question which I'm sure many of you will possibly disagree with. Right at this moment, do you feel that your salvation is assured, that if Jesus came now, he'd just hug you and say, I'm back, let's go to heaven? Or are you afraid that you're not measuring up? You know, if I adopted you as my child, and you kept asking, are you still going to be my dad? I said to you, well, I've adopted you, but we'll see. We'll see in the end whether I'll still want to be your dad. How terrible is that? You know, when you adopt someone in your family and they said, will you be my dad? I say, yes, I've adopted you. You are my child. The only way that you can stop being my child is when you turn your back on me and want to change your name. That's the only way that you will stop being my child. You don't need to fear. I know you're not perfect, but while you want to be in this family, while you want to carry my name, you are my child despite what you do. You do not need to be afraid of me. And yet, why is it when it comes to God, we always feel we don't measure up? What does it take to sink into our minds that God accepts you as you are? You don't need to perform for Him. It's not about performance. It's not about keeping rules. It's about, do you love Jesus? Because if God is a God of love, He will do nothing to coerce you, manipulate you, or control you. He will love you even if you break His laws. You know, there's possibly some people watching, I don't know, through the internet or here this morning that are abusers. And you're probably not really listening. And you don't want to change. I just want to say that God is watching. God is merciful to you at the moment, but there will come a reckoning, there will come a judgment, and justice demands that you will pay for the hurt that you have caused other people. I want to say that it is not acceptable in God's church for people to abuse other people. We will not tolerate it. If you want to change, if you're that type of person and want to change, that's fine. Come and see me and I can start a conversation with you. But believe me, it will be the hardest thing you've ever done. Because to get to that point, you've already crossed a lot of lines. And it'll take a miracle, but God's good at miracles and He can bring you back if you're willing. But you know, I find that in our church, most of us are the elephant in this room. But the thing we don't realize is that with Jesus Christ, we do not need to be chained up anymore. With Him, we have the strength to have the freedom that He wants to give to us. If you're in a situation of domestic violence, you know, we cannot help you unless you really want help. That's the first thing. I know some people, and this is the sad thing in the church, they find in statistics that if you're a Christian, you're more likely to stay in a violent situation longer. And you shouldn't have to. You are not obliged to stay in a controlling environment, no matter how much spiritual abuse is heaped on you. You know, the person who uses the Bible, you cannot divorce me except for unfaithfulness, but I can slap you, I can punch you, I can do all the rest, but you can't leave me and divorce me because then God says that you're a sinner. That is not how God operates. If you want help and you're in a domestic violence situation, you can call the police. We have a phone number, 1300 respect, just ring that number for assistance. You know, I want to leave you with this. We do live in a world of suffering. We all know that. And it will only be when Jesus comes again that we will be totally free of that suffering. At the moment, that's how it is. But right now, we have a choice not to let other people control us. We can break free with Jesus. And this morning, I encourage each one of you to lean on Christ, and no matter what your situation, He will get you through. I've chosen hymn number 292 for our final hymn.